Hello, my name is Fran Stoddard, and you've joined the Community Matters and Citizens Institute on Rural Design webinar on Creative Rural-Urban Alliances. Today's event is offered jointly by Community Matters, a program of the Orton Family Foundation, and the Citizens Institute on Rural Design, an initiative of the National Endowment for the Arts. For this webinar, we have three terrific practitioners who will help us understand and provide practical examples of the emerging practice of rural-urban cooperation that capitalizes on the unique assets of both places to bridge divides, build mutual understanding, uncover shared interests, and infuse creative energy into community and economic development. And it's often the arts that can help kickstart these efforts, so we'll lean on those folks who have made those connections through the arts. Savannah Barrett is the Program Director of Art of the Rural based in Kentucky. Hi, Savannah.
Hi, Fran. It's great to be here.
Okay, it's great that you're online. Kirsten Stoltz is Programming Director of the M12 Collective, and she joins us from Colorado. Welcome, Kirsten.
Hi, Fran. Thank you so much.
Hi. And often from Iowa, Missouri, or 6 other places in the United States and many abroad, but today from Washington, D.C., we have Chuck Flaherty, the founder and Vice President for Policy Programs at the Rural Policy Research Institute. Hi, Chuck.
Good afternoon, Fran. Thanks.
Okay. So just a little bit about the Adobe Connect platform, and then we'll get going with our program. The Adobe Connect platform allows us to share our presenters' visuals and take your questions, so be sure you click on that link to follow along. Many of you have already sent in questions, and we want to thank you for that. Our speakers have reviewed them, and many will be answered during the webinar. There will also be the opportunity to ask questions during or after the presentations. A Q&A box will pop up for you to write in questions that come up during the talk. If you have any technical issues, you can dial *0 for phone issues or email Leslie Wright at lwright, that's L-W-R-I-G-H-T, at orton.org. That email is also on the Adobe Connect page. So let's get on with the webinar. First up, RUPRI, as it's also known, is the only national policy institute in the U.S. dedicated to assessing the rural impacts of public policies. A research professor at the University of Missouri-Columbia, Chuck is author of numerous policy studies and journal articles addressing the rural differential in public policy decision-making. He's presented dozens of congressional briefings, and probably has one tomorrow, and has delivered major public policy addresses in over a dozen nations. He has also provided senior policy consultation to most federal departments, state and local governments, planning and development organizations, and diverse rural institutions and organizations worldwide. Chuck was born and raised on a 5th-generation family farm in the Appalachian foothills of southeastern Ohio, and his career has centered on services to rural people, primarily within the public policy arena. Welcome so much, Chuck. And so can you just start us off by grounding us in the rural-urban connection, and take it away.
Thanks, Fran, so much. I want to thank the Foundation for this, and thank all of you that are on the call. I know you're very busy. We've got 2 great presentations coming up from Kirsten and Savannah, who I'm sure those of you that are practitioners out there want to get to. I've been asked to sort of frame the discussion a bit and discuss why it's important right now that we talk about this topic the way it's been designed. I feel very, very strongly we've got to start thinking bigger about smaller places. We've got to think more carefully about the interdependency between rural and urban, and finally lift up collective impact models, particularly in the creative community, that are aligning the 2 of them. To do this today, I want to quickly cover 4 considerations. I want to spend 1 minute on rural and urban, how we define it, what it means. Then I want to chat about who's going to win, the World Bank or the OECD. Suggest some imperatives for all of us to think about as we try to build innovations regionally between rural and urban, and end up with what design theory calls the adjacent possible. So first, the rural-urban. There are many ways to define both, but all of them reflect a really deep challenge, because this is urban, but so is this. And this is rural, Loving, Texas, but so is this, Paducah, Kentucky. But the reality is that most counties have both rural and urban in their geography. This is a large city with the largest natural resource in America within its boundaries. Today, half the rural population lives in metropolitan counties. Many rural communities are in metropolitan statistical areas because of commuting patterns, and these are really no longer distinct categories in many places. They still are very much in the West, but in fact it's a continuum and they're inextricably linked. So when we think about it, we've got to begin to think about defining how they relate to one another in a unique regional geography. That gets to two of the major international development organizations. Who wins, the World Bank or OECD, and why is that important? Just very quickly, the World Bank in 2010 issued a major report called Reshaping Economic Geography, and it basically challenged the wisdom of place-based investments, the sort of investments the Obama administration has been working so hard on cross-sector. It really reinforced the hegemony of the market, and it said basically, if we're going to advance GDP in developed nations, we need to do it place blind. Forget place investments. Let's just invest in markets. Well, as that was being developed, I was actually working as a transatlantic fellow with OECD, which is the international body of developed nations, to get the deepest data assessment we could internationally of the contributions of large urban regions and more dispersed rural regions to overall GDP. The reality is that study really reinforced the validity of place-based investment. What that found is in our global developed nations, it is absolutely true that a third of GDP in all developed nations came from their global cities, but two-thirds of GDP in all those nations comes from the regional geographies that include rural all the way across the geography of that place. So if they are correct, how do we build policy and practice that aligns rural and urban a bit more in a regional approach, and how do we contribute to one another's future? Well, this is the framework Rupert uses, and in the interest of time, I just hope you'll look at it later. But I want to suggest three things. Quality of place will be essential, and new narratives are absolutely critical if those three major internal connections down below are to occur. How we rethink where wealth is and how we sustain it, how we engage youth in a much stronger way, how we think about social inclusion, and how we think about inequality. All of those are about collective impact approaches, and there are places where that is actually occurring right now. Now that is a challenge because today there's a huge vested interest in a lot of places keeping rural and urban stakeholders from finding common cause. You know the metro hegemonies out there. Our friends Richard Florida, Bruce Katz at Brookings, all friends of ours, they've done a great job. And what they've succeeded in doing is putting a metaphor out there in public policy which basically says the engine of growth in the United States is in our metropolitan areas. That's partially true, but the OECD study clearly says it's only partially true. In fact, this is global now. For those of you that know what's going on in China, they are going to move 250 million people from rural areas to cities in the next 10 years. And I would suggest from a policy standpoint, it's really time for us to ask, is the socio-economic and environmental cost of urban density about to exceed the social and economic cost of rural space? And how are we going to steward and supply the clean air, the affordable food, the sustainable energy, and the arts and cultural amenities and ecosystems which are going to support this global agglomeration? 2030, two-thirds of the world population is going to be in large urban settings, what they call Homo urbanus. Now, while that's very true, I want to suggest that George Bernard Shaw was right. He said all great truths begin as blasphemies. I just suggest we got to be cautious here because all great blasphemies also begin as blasphemy, but I think the time is approaching where stewardship of rural resources writ large is going to be more critical to our urban sisters and brothers. And when that gets realized, we're going to need wiser public policy to think about sustaining the rural leadership that stewards those resources. And at that point, we really have species questions, not policy questions. So let me just close with a couple suggestions for how we could deal with the adjacent possible, how rural and urban might begin to reach out in policy and practice. This is a great picture from the great work that folks at Fermentation Fest in Wisconsin do. Savannah Barrett and I were in a group in a van last year at Fermentation Fest, and toward the end of the day, the light is not good, but I think that installation is so symbolically instructive, and it asks all the right questions. There are multiple wealths in rural. They simply need realigned in new and exciting ways. 2 years ago, I was asked by Governor Steve Beshear and Congressman Hal Rogers to help them think about how the 60 counties in eastern Kentucky, rural and urban, could rethink and envision future that included a major attention to the arts and to culture. To initiate that, I built a collective impact framework, which we worked for the last year and a half with the wonderful folks in that region to begin to unpack. And I would simply say, if you've not looked at the Stanford Social Innovation Review's article on collective impact, you must. In rural areas where we have challenges in capacity and resources, we are going to have to figure out new ways to link philanthropic, public, and private resources. They are doing that in Kentucky. Savannah will talk about a small piece of that, and I want to thank all of you for beginning to think about this. I really do believe the future of rural America is inextricably tied to an appreciation in urban America that we matter to their future. And this is Percy. This is a colt that was born 2 years ago on our farm in eastern Ohio, and it's there because I just wanted to share Percy because I love Percy. It's been great to be with you, and I look forward to the next two presentations.
Great, Chuck. Thank you so much, and thank you for sharing Percy with us. It's a lot of food for thought. There was a lot put into 10 minutes, so I appreciate Chuck taking off with putting this whole piece in context. And now we'll hear from Kirsten Stoltz, Programming Director of the M12 Collective. Previously, Stoltz worked as a curator for the Boulder Museum of Contemporary Art and director and curator of the Center for Contemporary Art in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Stoltz holds a deep appreciation for the Plains region. She understands that the preservation of rural communities and reconstituting urban-rural realities is crucial to contemporary life. The M12 Collective is a group of artists and creative professionals based in Byers and Last Chance, Colorado, known for groundbreaking and award-winning creative projects that collaboratively explore the aesthetics of rural cultures and landscapes. M12 has been featured widely, including exhibitions at the International Venice Architecture Biennale and museums in Sweden, Australia, Holland, Ireland, Chicago, New York, Baltimore, Tennessee, and Wisconsin. I'm looking forward to this presentation. Welcome, Kirsten.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much. I just wanted to, again, tell you that I'm very appreciative of the invitation to speak today. It's awesome to understand that there are organizations supporting collectives like ourselves that are proudly rooted in rural spaces and begin to lay the foundation for decades of cultural pathfinders yet to come. I wanted to start out, we actually have a new book out that's called A Decade of Country Hits. And I wanted to start by reading just a short selection of that, what I wrote about M12 in our practice. We have deep ties to the American Plains region. We've had long conversations in wheat fields, studying the remains of abandoned homesteads, attending family gatherings and dirt track races, staring 100 miles in every direction into the vast landscape of the Great Plains. Living and working in this landscape, we explore our rural ties. We talk about shifting cultural landscapes, about reconstitution of rural communities, and about active participation and about local knowledge. M12 believes rural places can stimulate a visceral response, activating artists and reversing the typical understanding of remote places as wastelands. Our work values connectivity and the neighbor, providing a valuable counterpoint to contemporary art in urban environments. The projects and programs that we produce contribute to a growing network of individuals and groups celebrating and exploring a contemporary rural perspective. In our lifetime, we've watched rural towns on the plains transform from vibrant hubs of activity into mere pit stops for gas and fast food. And yet rural culture is alive and well. Youth programs such as Future Farmers of America continue to thrive, as does an unabashed national pride and the same persistent work ethic found among Western homesteaders. The rural condition is not all doom and gloom, and it's not the focus of M12's work to be critical of failures taking place in the rural U.S. Rather, we celebrate the positives in our region, from sheep herding to race car building. This is our studio. Our studio is in Byers, Colorado, a town of 1,000 people, and this is our building. It's an old feed store space, recently renovated. We've been working on it for about 3 years. It's a multi-use space on a main street littered with vacant buildings. We have a library. It's non-lending, but community members can come in. There are books that speak to social practice and site-specific works around the U.S. and beyond. We also have a vast collection of regional books that speak about the American High Plains region. We have a small exhibition space that our visiting artists can utilize while they're there. We also have classroom and community gatherings all throughout the year, particularly centered around our collaborations with the University of Colorado in Boulder. You guys have all seen this image, but this was one of our first Action on the Plains projects that we did with Jetson Arama, and he is interested in rural architecture, abandoned buildings and homes, but reactivating those spaces with wheat pastings that give a history of the people and the farmers that live, still occupy that space. This is on in Byers, Colorado. It's on a grain bin that's on Joe Tariq's farm, and it's beautiful because you can actually see it from the interstate highway as cars zoom by, and hopefully people have been looking for it, and it stimulates a lot of conversation. The program, the Action on the Plains program, we invite creative practitioners whose work is on the cutting edge of an ever-expanding international dialogue surrounding art practices in rural environments. And we insist that all projects support the importance of participation. This way, the work is setting the pace for new forms of cultural expression in rural spaces. We recently just finished a documentary which was a collaboration with Wopke Veenstra, who is a Dutch artist and has been also working in rural environments in the region of Friesland. We decided to build a project about youth interaction and about how generations of farm families begin to pass along traditions. When Wopke and I first met with the teachers in Deer Trail, Colorado, we asked if anyone was going to take on their family farm, and all 12 of them did not raise their hands. So it was a real opportunity for us to get the conversation going. We had our students from Deer Trail go to Friesland in the Netherlands, and the Friesland students come to Deer Trail. And it was a really exciting exchange that stimulated the ideas that we need to talk to one another and learn from each other and learn about farming traditions and how to integrate important ideas into both of our landscapes as they shift. They did everything together. They're best of friends now, and it was a really wonderful project. It took about 2 years to complete that. Another project, and I'm just going through these kind of case studies, but if you go to our website, you'll actually see a lot more of our projects that we've put together. I'm focusing on the visiting artist component of our organization. Cultivator, this was a project that we collaborated with a group in Sweden called Cultivator, called Grams University. It's a cultural exchange initiative that serves to build conversations about the importance of rural cultural connections that address important global issues such as environmental sustainability, food production, and diversification of social landscape in rural communities. When we began the project, I reached out to a lot of our collaborators, and many of those are in the region. Rose Kronk, who lives in Last Chance, Colorado, invited us over to have lunch. Many of the projects that we have start with a potluck lunch so that the folks that we're working with all get to know each other through a social event. She explains that her family history, her folks were from, her grandparents were actually from the East and traveled across the West with a tiny rhubarb plant, and it has been maintained on the farm for over 100 years. And she made us this pie, and it was just this really symbolic moment of, you know, how we need to listen to one another and preserve the ideas of folk traditions and anthropology and contemporary art. All of these things really meld together. What we decided to do was design a mobile unit that would gather stories over time. Many of the farms and towns are about 30 miles in distance from one another, and a lot of folks can't travel. And so we went to family farms. We also went to towns. We went to schools, and we did interviews. This image is actually, we were invited to park the mobile classroom at the Washington County Fairgrounds during the county fair. In an exchange, Cultivator invited us to their rural community in Sweden, and we began talking about traditional architectural structures, and that both of our regions relied a lot on root cellars as refrigeration and preservation for food. And so what we did was we built a root cellar, but on top of it, we also included an open air classroom with a 70-year-old piece of wood that lays in the center of the classroom so that people can sit and exchange stories, but also exchange very traditional knowledge about canning, preserving knowledge. And today it's in use, and it's actually covered with a really beautiful graphy. It's gorgeous. So similar. A lot of times our projects also include this idea of intergenerational exchange. If we don't hold those conversations as important as any other conversations, we're really missing an opportunity for artists to make work that speaks to these communities. The rural communities are shifting. There's a real need to engage in both the elderly population, but also making those stories known to youth. This was one of the workshops that we did while we were in Sweden. Nat Slavey is a photographer. She did a project about exploring the changing landscape of the plains through the abandonment of missile silos, a history that wasn't very known throughout the region, but people were very, very interested. Last Chance is about 35 miles from our studio. It sits at the convergence of two major highway systems that actually have been ignored because the interstate highway bypassed the town. Historically, it was the last chance to get gas, food, and lodging until you get to Denver. And we see it as it symbolically aligns with our ideas of what is the last chance for rural cultural exchanges in our region, in the American High Plains. We partner with the Washington County Commissioners, and they gave us a 40-acre plot of land to do experimental environmental projects on. They're truly champions of our project and our organization. And what's really nice about it, they see these shifts that are happening in small towns and are looking for atypical ways to bring about economic benefits to their citizens. And so they're very open to having a group of artists out to talk about these changes that are happening in the community and sharing information. The experimental site, as we call it, this 40-acre site, is being designed to contemplate and amplify life and the landscape on the American High Plains. We're looking to build architectural forms that will be inspired by the vastness of the High Plains. The future site potentials include design-build projects, an FFA farm plot, earthworks, performance, education. And in closing, I just wanted to leave you with this quote that hangs on our wall in our studio as visiting artists come in and out of the building. We seek to build space in our rural community that is a source of energy, a rite of passage, a place to reflect on our turbulent age, and a landscape whose spaciousness and hidden springs encourage viewers to imagine new ways of being. So thank you, Annika Smith, and she wrote The Great Wide Open. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kirsten. Some beautiful pieces. And by the way, Kirsten mentioned her website. That and other resources will be shared with you all on this page after the presentations. There'll be another box that pops up there. Our final presenter, Savannah Barrett, will offer some great on-the-ground examples. Savannah is the Program Director for Art of the in Arts Management from the University of Oregon with a concentration in community arts. Savannah is a passionate advocate for arts access in isolated places and has recently published research relating to the Rural Arts Program of the Cooperative Extension Service. She has contributed to the Kentucky and Oregon arts communities in many ways, including founding a local arts agency in her teens. Most recently, she has served as education manager for the Louisville Visual Arts Association and facilitator of the Oregon Folklife Network and Lane Arts Council collaboration. Savannah, welcome, and could you just start us off by telling us about Art of the Rural?
Absolutely. Thank you, Fran, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to share our work with you. As she mentioned, I'm the Director of Programs for Art of the Rural, and Art of the Rural is a collaborative organization that works online and on the ground in communities across the country with a mission to help build the field of rural arts and share new narratives on rural culture and community. I'll start with sort of giving you some values that frame this work. We believe that popular conceptions of rural often lack nuance. While the term certainly has demographic meaning, it is also a category of cultural identity. Rural people have moved to cities, and many urban folks have deep relationships to the country. We seek to celebrate rural places while also including perspectives along the rural-urban continuum. We believe that rural and urban places are vitally interdependent, and that in most regions, we experience a shared social and economic future. We also believe that regions themselves are always relational, that they are made up of a shared cultural history and not stable boundaries. These values, like I said, are a useful frame to consider as I tell you about a few of the Art of the Rural projects that explore commonalities across rural and urban regions. The first of these is the Kentucky Rural Urban Exchange. Developed in 2014, the Kentucky Rural Urban Exchange is a partnership with Appleshop, and it's a placemaking strategy to boost local economies and sustain communities by enacting the full power of collaboration between arts, agriculture, and small business as driving forces in economic development. We characterize the exchange as a new approach to creative placemaking that builds a statewide constellation network and integrates key sectors and partnership strategies. We think of it as a holistic approach to placemaking that prioritizes network building and collective capacity and resource sharing, both within local communities and across regions of Kentucky. So the idea for the Kentucky Rural Urban Exchange came from a shared recognition of the historic divide across Kentucky's physical and cultural landscapes. We believe region is a relational term, so when we talk about regional creative placemaking or about Kentucky as a region, what we're really talking about is a shared cultural and historical experience that's based on relationship to one another and relationship to place. The exchange aims to highlight and to expand those relationships. In recent decades, economic shifts across Kentucky from coal to manufacturing to tobacco farming have severed generational economic ties to land and place. These shifts created what we believe is a shared cultural and psychological experience across a generation. And this experience has catalyzed migration between rural and urban Kentucky, and we think opened a space for the exploration of a shared vision across the state. The exchange recognizes and explores both these perceived differences and our common reality. Our network is translating value across regional divides, and by so doing, expanding a relational space across rural and urban Kentucky. The heart of this work is really a mutual desire to increase collaboration and creative dialogue between rural and urban Kentuckians. This exchange is piloting an effort to build a network of partnerships throughout the state, and that these partnerships are then sustained through both personal investment and collective ownership. In the past year, the Rural Urban Exchange Network brought together 40 next-generation leaders from both Louisville and Eastern Kentucky to build this unified platform for new models of community development throughout the state. We met in Whitesburg in June and in Louisville in September with 16 matches of artists, chefs, farmers, musicians, filmmakers, archivists, cultural workers, politicians, and business owners. Over 7 days throughout the summer, matches got to know one another as friends and collaborators. We ate at favorite restaurants, swam in lakes, visited workplaces and gardens, attended festivals, and hiked Pine Mountain in the Iroquois Park. Then we focused on our common issues, visions, and realities. We structured the Rural Urban Exchange from the beginning as an iterative project, knowing that things would emerge that we couldn't expect. Since those meetings this summer in Whitesburg and Louisville, we're really excited that more than a dozen collaborative cross-sector projects have developed. And these projects range from a partnership with the University of Louisville School of Business to design a feasibility study and investment strategy to reopen the century-old Daniel